Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt on the West Coast for 3 more weeks. But following the war, I hope you were watching Special Report last night. I got to chime in on the State of the Union tonight. I'll be back on with Brett today in the pre-State of the Union show. And I'll, of course, dissect the speech tomorrow live, everything that the president says and doesn't say. I hope he declares sanctions on Russian oil and gas. This is the most important thing right now. We continue to finance the war by continuing to buy Russian oil and gas. We ought to put a complete embargo on it. As we have on Iranian oil, we ought to sanction people who take delivery of it. It's 1 out of 10 barrels of oil sold in the world comes from Russia. It's how they are paying for the cluster bombs. It's how they are paying for the rape of Kyiv and Kharkiv. And I got a chance to bring this up last night. Britt Hume had been on earlier with Bret Baier, and they've been talking about the oil. Britt's right over the target on this as well. So he came to me and asked me about it. Here's the first cut from last night's show, cut number 13.
Hugh, I talked with Britt about the amazing outpouring from European nations, some that have not been active on this front before, and a change in tide there. But what the Biden administration is doing and not doing is a factor ahead of the State of the Union address tomorrow.
Well, I heard Britt say what I also believe, Brett, and I heard that exchange. We have to sanction Russian oil. Russian oil is paying for cluster bombs that are killing children in Kyiv and Kharkiv and other cities throughout Ukraine. There is a direct line from Russian oil, the money that comes in, the invasion that is underway, the atrocities for which hopefully war crime trials will be held. 57% of people asked by Quinnipiac in a new poll released today, has President Biden been too tough, not tough enough, or just right? 57% said not tough enough. I think they are talking about the oil sanctions. We need to stop that oil. We need to do it yesterday. Hopefully he'll announce it in the State of the Union. That's what I'm hoping for. Brett came back, though, and said, come on, what's the over-under on anything like that, Hugh? Cut number 14.
But, Hugh, the possibility that President Biden is going to say something like that about energy here in the U.S. at the State of the Union is probably what percentage?
5%. But if he does not, I hope tomorrow night, Brett, that Nancy Pelosi in her last State of the Union behind the president rips up the speech like she did, because unless the president does that, children are going to continue to die from cluster bombs in the big cities of Ukraine. And Brett said the over-under that 0. Tearing it up. Just remember tonight when you watch, it's Nancy Pelosi's last State of the Union. There are small blessings everywhere. And I doubt she'll tear up this, even though if the president, maybe he will. I'm hoping that he will. He's behind. He's been behind. He's been consistently behind Europe. I was amazed this morning to read that the rest of the media has figured this out. Everybody else has figured out we are way behind Europe. And the good news from the Washington Post. Quote, over just a handful of days, Europe was shocked out of a post-Cold War era in which it left many of the democratic world's most burning security problems to the United States, close quote. Bad news in the same Post article, the continent leapfrogged the United States, which wasn't prepared. What a surprise, Joe Biden wasn't prepared. So the latest developments, there is this massive column, I'm sure you've seen 40 miles of tanks and armored personnel carriers. It has been stopped for a period of time outside of Kyiv. Nighttime is when it moves. Nighttime is when the Javelin missiles come out. Russia is counting on that to destroy Kyiv. They're just going to do Chechnya tactics. Grozny. 20 years ago, they leveled the city. They are dropping cluster bombs on Kharkiv, which is the second largest city 30 miles from the Russian border. They're trying to get to Kyiv with the kind of artillery that will do that. The European Union says 400,000 refugees from Ukraine have already crossed into neighboring. The ambush report comes from the Telegraph this morning. That long column has been hit by Ukrainian artillery and drone strikes. And military experts say it's doubled in size overnight on Monday and was a sitting duck for Ukrainian artillery and drone strikes. About 20 miles from where it was last spotted, the Russian advance appears to have hit a wall. In Bucha, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, it could be Bucha, 15 miles northwest of Kyiv, images posted online show the bloody aftermath of one of the most brutal ambushes and firefights of the 5-day-old war. In Kyiv itself, Russian special forces troops were halted by guards at one of the city's most famous religious landmarks.
A photograph showed what appeared to be a Russian corpse lying close to St. Michael's Golden Dome Monastery, which the local Orthodox Archbishop issued a statement claiming that saboteurs had been neutralized. As talks were taking place in Belarus, Russian troops faced being massacred on the roads into the capital. If Russians were being killed by church guards, the resistance could clearly be no pushover. Well, we don't know. Eventually, force has its way. That's why we have to, we shocked the Russian economy yesterday. Investors struggled to trade Russian assets as the sanctions hit the market plummeting. The losses of Russians yesterday, ordinary Russians, were extraordinary. As global investors with at least $150 billion in Russian securities are trying to dump them, and as Russians are trying to get rubles, and the ruble declined in value by 30% yesterday after a precipitous drop on Friday, the Russian people are getting wiped out. Meanwhile, Russia finally got kicked out of the World Cup. FIFA originally said, they can play, they just can't call themselves Russia, proving that they're not just corrupt but stupid. It took a day of people like me saying stuff like that, and it's not really deeply insightful. It's simply obvious that it's stupid. The whole world is disgusted with Russia, wants nothing to do with Russia. State liquor stores are pulling Russian vodka from the market. That means eventually the sales back up. That's good. That's everything. Everyone in Russia should pay for their dictator. At least 70 Ukrainians are missing after Russia targets a military base in Oktayra, the regional governor says. Finland is beginning to talk about NATO membership. Good. Britain will not enforce a no-fly zone. That's good. We do not need NATO on Russian dogfights. Russians might shift to night operations. Yeah, it's not going to help if you're firing because the guys with the javelins can find you. Thank God Trump sent javelins in 2017 and 18, 19, and 20. Not at the speed they should have gone. There were screw-ups in the Army. There were concerns about where they were going to be stored. It's all Mark Esper related stuff. But Trump said send them. They got there. Now they're being taken from wherever they were being stored to the front and being used. Airstrike has hit a big government office in Kharkiv this morning. Big explosions. And the blockade on Russia's central bank, according to the Wall Street Journal, neutralizes defense against sanctions. And the U.S., according to the Wall Street Journal, is positioned to withstand economic shock from the Ukraine crisis. That's because, of course, Russia is like 3% of GDP. Their economy is 1/20th the size of 1/12th the size of our economy. They can't hurt the West. And that doesn't count Europe. All they can do is drive up our gas prices. So my question to you is 1-800-520-1234. Open up the phones, Ben. Will you be willing to take some pain at the pump by sanctioning Russian gas? I am. It's already expensive, right, to drive anywhere? But the only way to stop this, and when they began using cluster bombs on kids yesterday, Putin has said, take the city. He's gone with the Napoleon maxim, if you're going to take Vienna, take Vienna. If you're going to take Kyiv. That's great when citizens are not in the way, when you've been able to evacuate civilians and especially children and old ladies. But they haven't done that in Kyiv and Kharkiv. This is the fifth day, and they've already gone to cluster bombs. Now, Russia used those in Syria. They used them in Grozny. They are army-on-army acceptable weapons, right? Army-on-army, military-on-military acceptable weapons. They're not acceptable in a crowded city where the civilians are millions many. That's just a terror campaign, and that's Putin. Now, last night on Special Report, there's also a lot of talk about whether Putin has lost it. I don't know if he's lost it. Doesn't matter if he's lost it. He's got commanders on the ground. They're committing war crimes. And I just want you to know, whatever they say, it doesn't matter. They're committing war crimes. By the way, on the White House lawn last night, Joe Biden got a shouted question, cut number 9.
Mr. President, is Ukraine winning the war?
Mr. President, you fear? You believe Putin will use a nuclear weapon?
Mr. President, are you worried about nuclear war?
That's him ignoring nuclear war questions. The president walks and talks like a really old guy, I hope he gets a nap today so he doesn't encourage the Russians more, but that infirmity is itself provocative. Don't go anywhere, America. 1-800. Welcome back, America. That music means David M. Drucker is in the house, the author of In Trump's Shadow, and friend of Dwayne. Maybe he'll have Dwayne pick up. I just sent Dwayne a clip of Boris Johnson speaking in Poland, incredibly powerful. Drucker, though, won't have seen that yet. Good morning, Drucker. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. Thank you.
Are you going to the State of the Union tonight?
I'm not going to the State of the Union. I'm actually traveling in Ohio as we speak, and I'll be in Cincinnati probably discussing, before to the State of the Union this evening, I'll be discussing my book, but probably discussing foreign policy and what is happening in Ukraine. As you know, there are a lot of Americans of Ukrainian descent or recent Ukrainian immigrants to the United States that live in the state of Ohio. So,
well, they're mostly in the real state of Ohio. I'm sure people have told you Cincinnati's in Ohio, but it's not. It's Kentucky. And that's just a line drawing error. But the Ukrainians are up in Cleveland, where all the great Americans live, are up in the northeastern Ohio area. Are you doing a book signing and a book talk tonight, David?
Yes, I am.
Where?
I've got to look at my agenda. This thing has been set up by my Sherpas, and there are two different places I might be. I've got a luncheon in Columbus where I'm going to be talking about the book and signing books. Yesterday I started in Cleveland. I ended the day in Youngstown, which is where I am now.
Which part of Youngstown? Did you go to Warren?
Yeah, I'm at this place called the Grand Resort, which is actually a rather nice place. I spoke to a Chamber of Commerce here yesterday evening, and I'll be hitting the road after we get off the line.
Well, I hope people listening on 98.9 in Columbus look up David Drucker. He probably doesn't have a website. You have to go just Google Drucker in Columbus, and go Google Drucker in Cincinnati if you're listening to me on WMOH or on my Dayton affiliate. He's definitely worth listening to. What do you expect from the State of the Union tonight, David?
Well, I don't know what I expect, Hugh. I've been thinking about this for days, at least since the invasion of Ukraine, and I think it's a very pivotal. What happened is this State of the Union is now a very pivotal, important speech, not just for the president politically, but internationally and historically. And there are a number of policies the president could propose that would further put the screws to Putin and pressure him with everything short of, a U.S. military intervention, which is not going to happen, obviously. And I don't know if we're going to see all of those screws proposed. I do know that part of what matters is his tone and his rhetoric and adding something to the mix, even if he won't go all the way from a policy perspective. And what I mean by that is I don't have a lot of confidence that he's going to propose energy policies that will reflect the previous administration just because of how important climate issues are to his political base or the Democratic Party's political base. But there are other things he can do, including increasing military spending, immediately asking for a supplemental from Congress so that more lethal aid can be rushed to Ukraine, so that the U.S. military can beef itself up and people can see that we mean business. And so I'll be curious to see if he does any or all of those things, and also how the speech is delivered. And we know because of this, there are going to be very important viewers around the world watching this. The numbers aren't that important to me, the ratings, because we know that among those who do watch will be key viewers that need to get a message.
Well, I also think Putin will be watching closely. I'm hoping he announces sanctions on the purchase of Russian oil and gas, David. People debate that, at a 37% approval, he can't actually let gas prices rise in the United States by limiting the oil market. And he's not going to increase supply dramatically because of the fanatics in his party. But I think Americans will absorb the hit if they understand they've got to stop the cluster bombs falling on children in Kharkiv. And this is just the beginning of the atrocity. We're going to film this. This isn't like Chechnya. There are many, many people with... Did you see the pictures out of Kharkiv this morning, what they did to the town center there?
Not yet. I was scrolling through trying to get a picture of the news and where things are, so I was reading about it.
Yeah,
but I have not yet seen the pictures.
It's pretty devastating. And I don't think you can go wrong by being too tough on Russia. But Quinnipiac yesterday said 57% of Americans don't think Biden's been tough enough. Now, whether you think that's unfair, that's the reality. So if he comes off infirm tonight, that's going to get worse, isn't it?
Yes, it is going to get worse, which is why I said part of what is important for him to project in this speech, both domestically but also for the international audience, is not to project infirmness, is not to project an idea of weakness or anything other than resolve and the fact that action will continue to try and pressure Putin to withdraw or make this as painful as possible. And so the imagery and the rhetoric has a lot of importance, even though the policies do matter. And I do agree with you, and I think we've seen this around the world. And one of the most fascinating things about what has happened is to see the grassroots revolt in Europe. This isn't just European leaders revolting against Putin. They have the support of their voters. We have not often seen that.
I'm going to be explaining that when we come back, America. Don't go anywhere. David M. Drucker, go get his book, In Trump's Shadow, and go find him in Columbus or Cincinnati today. And David, if you send me a link to your appearance schedule, I'll find a way to post it on Twitter. But if you just Google David M. Drucker, Columbus, David M. Drucker, Cincinnati, you'll find him. You folks in Kentucky can go over to the Cincinnati book signing. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Amazing footage out of Ukraine as the Russians begin to just randomly target downtown Kharkiv with devastating missiles. I'm joined by Byron York of the Washington Examiner, Fox News Channel. Good morning, Byron.
Good morning, Hugh.
I am hoping that tonight in the State of the Union, the president announces sanctions on oil and gas coming from Russia, because that's the cash cow that Putin is using to pay for this. Do you expect that will happen?
No, I don't. I think the president has been a bit of a follower in this. Listen, I think his caution has been basically a pretty good thing. I mean, we've had voices saying he should impose a no-fly zone, or maybe that Western, NATO forces should attack this convoy or something, doing things that I think that would be disastrous for the United States. So his caution is a good thing. I think that he has a chance tonight to inspire people in support of Ukraine and in support of democratic world order, but it's unlikely that he will do it because he is Joe Biden. We have the situation where, the last 4 polls for Biden, in looking at Real Clear Politics of polls, job approval 38, 39, 40, 38. So he's clearly been sinking quite a bit.
Quinnipiac yesterday said that 57%, which is a big number, of Americans think he has not been strong enough vis-a-vis Russia. Yeah, that's a big number, saying he's weak. Leading from behind is back.
Well, because a large number of them have serious doubts about whether he is physically and mentally up to the job. But what you're seeing here on the Democratic side and on their sort of cheerleaders in the press is this hope that there's a possibility for kind of a reset in the Biden presidency. If you look at the headline of Politico Playbook yesterday, it was a presidency transformed. If you look at a New York Times analysis, they said the dizzying events of the past week are redefining the arc of his presidency. So they're looking at this as a possibility to sort of redefine the Biden presidency from a presidency that was bogged down in the border, in inflation, in failed spending initiatives, and create a more heroic narrative of him supporting Ukraine.
Byron, the actual record is appeasement abroad, inflation at home, teachers union first, students last, and parents last, open southern border, closed police precincts. That's it. That's the T-shirt.
And there's something interesting also going on, which is that, this is the State of the Union is a traditional, what is called the laundry list speech, and some of them have just been appallingly bad of both parties, the laundry list speeches. And so there's some talk that Biden should kind of abandon the laundry list and give a a stirring speech about Ukraine, which again I don't think he's really up to doing. But what's interesting is, the crisis in Ukraine has just not stopped the rest of American politics. I mean, Biden, for example, has a constituency that's angry that he has not prioritized climate change enough. So they're really going to want to see that. And what you and I would say is the obvious thing that the United States should do, which is reopen its entire energy production capacity, is something he could never, ever do. Congress is still doing stuff. The Senate yesterday voted on a radically pro-abortion bill. It lost. They only got 46 votes for it. But the Democrats in the House and the Senate are doing stuff, and the president's speech will be about more than just Ukraine, even though it's all that you and I are talking about.
And that's really a dumb strategy. And if you're listening, Ron, rewrite the speech. It should be short. It should be focused. The American people don't want to hear about child tax credits tonight. Here's Boris Johnson in Poland. This is an example of how a leader leads earlier this morning.
A woman from my team is now in Bila Cerkva, and she is there with 2 kids, and Russian military is over there, and she's so much afraid that she will be shot. Kharkiv, the city where I was studying, was bombarded today, fully, the downtown square. So you're talking about the stoicism of Ukrainian people, but Ukrainian women and Ukrainian children are in deep fear because of bombs and missiles which are going from the sky. And Ukrainian people are desperately asking for the West to protect our sky. We are asking for the no-fly zone. We are saying in response that it will trigger World War III. But what is the alternative, Mr. Prime Minister? To observe how our children are, instead of planes, are protecting NATO from the missiles and bombs? What's the alternative for the no-fly zone? We have planes here, we have air defense system in Poland, in Romania. NATO has this air defense. At least this air defense could shield the western Ukraine so that these children with women could come to the border. It's impossible now to cross the border. There are 30 kilometers of lines. Imagine crossing the border with a baby or with 2 children. I'm so glad that Samantha Power is coming here to the border from the Polish side. Let her come to the border from Ukrainian side and see that. Britain guaranteed our security under Budapest Memorandum. So you're coming to Poland. You're not coming to Kiev, Prime Minister. You're not coming to Lviv. Because you are afraid. Because NATO is not willing to defend. Because NATO is afraid of the World War III. But it is already started. And these are Ukrainian children who are there taking the hit. You're talking about more sanctions, Prime Minister. But Roman Abramovich is not sanctioned. He's in London. His children are not in the bombardments. His children are there in London. Putin's children are in Netherlands, in Germany, in mansions. Where are all these mansions seized? I don't see that. I see that my family members, that my team members are saying that we are crying. We don't have where to run. Well, this is what is happening, Prime Minister.
Well, Thank you is all you can say. The eloquence there, Byron, is from the reporter, right? Not from the Prime Minister.
Well, I just heard 2 words from the Prime Minister. You're right. It's not.
Right.
Listen, it was an impassioned plea in favor of something that the United States and NATO are not going to do. We have had talk. Adam Kinzinger, the Republican member of Congress, called for a no-fly zone a few days ago. We've had other people call for a no-fly zone. She's calling for a no-fly zone. And the reason is, you see these aerial photographs of this enormous Russian convoy headed toward Kyiv. And I think any American or military person would think highway of death. This is something that United States or NATO forces could just take out if they wanted to start a big war in Europe. And they're not going to do it. So I understand the frustration in that voice, but Boris Johnson did not say, okay, we'll do it.
Well, we're not going to do a no-fly zone, but there is video.
Well, that's what she was calling for.
I know, but there's this video that's out now about Kharkiv where they've destroyed the center of Kharkiv in random bombing. And I think the president has to answer that. And so if he doesn't answer the emotion, I think that question transmits Ukrainian emotion and Western resolve and European reaction. And the only thing we can do, we're not going to do a no-fly zone, no kinetic contact between American NATO troops and Russian troops. People have to understand that. We're not doing that. But we can sanction Russian oil and gas. We could do that, Byron. And you're saying you don't expect him to do even that?
Well, there are further. You're absolutely right. There are further economic sanctions, that we could do. Although the economic sanctions that Biden has imposed, I'm sure he would say, have just been in place for literally hours. I mean, a couple of days. And these are things that, remember, at the press conference the other day, he said, well, let's have a conversation in a month and see where they are. These sanctions are not designed to immediately cripple, like by noon, cripple the Russian economy. They're designed to take effect over a longer period of time.
Well, so they don't have a month. Kharkiv is already basically, they got kids getting killed. I think the president tonight, the stakes are high because he's got to show he's doing everything he can, Byron. Last word to you.
I think the greatest worry, that I personally have, the goal is to get Russia out of an independent Ukraine. I think all of us have been struck by how bad the Russian military has been and effective the resistance has been. And I think what we're thinking about now is trying to get Putin to have some sort of exit ramp out of Ukraine before doing something like he did in Grozny in Chechnya.
He's begun that this morning. And so I'm just saying the president tonight is going to be speaking against a backdrop of impatience that is international. Byron York will be on, I'm sure, Fox News tonight talking about the speech. He'll be writing about it in the Washington Examiner. Follow him on Twitter. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means I'm joined by Admiral James Stavridis, retired United States Navy, former Allied Supreme Commander of NATO, former head of the U.S. Southern Command, now the chairman of the Rockefeller Foundation, a partner at Carlyle. And Admiral, I've seen you in a lot of places. I just want to step back. How do you think the war is going? What has caught your eye?
The war is going less well for Russia than I think many people believed. Personally, I always had a certain level of confidence that the Ukrainians would fight hard, be able to at least slow them down. And I base that on personal experience. The Ukrainians fought under my command in Afghanistan. They deployed on NATO missions all over the NATO region. They've been part of NATO, although not a former ally. So I've visited many times. I know the spirit, shall we say, of the Ukrainians. You're seeing that on full display. So I think some have been surprised at the level of resistance. Now, quantity has a quality all its own, an old Russian saying, and gradually, I think, unfortunately, the Russians will grind them down. So that's been a pleasant surprise to many. And as well, Hugh, I've been flat out surprised that the Russians haven't pulled the cyber weapons out of the bag. I think they are holding those off almost as war reserve. They don't like showing them technically to the West because it gives us the opportunity to reverse engineer them and blunt them. And those are the two things that stand out for me right now. I'll give you a third, actually, since you and I often talk about leadership. President Zelensky has become just a profile in courage. And not just that, a lot of people can be courageous. He couples that with pretty extraordinary communication skills. The speech he gave at the EU, the speech he gave at the Munich Security Conference, his one-liners, I don't want to ride, I want more ammunition, his physical symbolism and changing out of his suits and into hunting gear. You got to like that guy a lot. So it's been a tougher slog than I think Vladimir Putin counted on. I think it'll be tough ahead, and I think the Ukrainians are going to be able to hold on to the western part of their country is how I scored the whole thing, and thus we may end up with yet another frozen conflict at the end of the day.
Admiral, I want to talk to you about the EU's offer of airplanes. I gather these are MiG-29s that are in the inventory of some NATO countries. Does Ukraine have the pilots necessary to fly these?
They do, and that's a very good thing. And if you look at those long Russian columns headed inbound, and you look at Russians just flying transports for logistics, there's some big fat targets. And yes, 3 NATO nations have operated the MiG-29s, old Warsaw Pact, notably Poland, right across the border. And yes, the Ukrainians have flown them as well. The Ukrainians, have pilots who have flown everything in the old Soviet, current Russian inventory. So those are very useful addition to their kit.
Are you surprised that the Russians haven't yet seized control of the skies?
I am surprised, and I think that there's another issue here for Vladimir Putin. You know, the old saying in the military is that professionals study logistics while amateurs are worried about strategy. I don't think that's entirely true, but I suspect Vladimir Putin's generals were pretty focused on the strategy and not enough on the logistics. And 2 indications of that, one of which you mentioned, they haven't truly consolidated control of the sky. Both there are still Ukrainian jets flying around, there's still Ukrainian anti-air systems in place. The U.S., believe me, would have taken all that out in the first 48 hours. The other problem is the pure logistics, moving fuel, food, blood, everything you need to the front lines. Pretty clearly, that's part of the slowdown here. And it's related to, final point, related to the fact that the Russians came in on at least 4, maybe 7 axes, however you score it. And, you know, when you attack everywhere, sometimes you attack nowhere because you've divided your forces. They underestimated the Ukrainians and they overestimated their ability to go in on multiple axes. They're paying the price.
Now, tonight is the State of the Union, Admiral, and I hope that I hear the president announce sanctions on Russian oil and gas, because the export of oil and gas, the last thing they've got, we very carefully crafted the sanctions to avoid hitting that because Europe and the United States, to a certain extent, depends upon Russian oil. But with these pictures this morning from Kharkiv and atrocities and the use of cluster munitions against children and women and civilians, I don't know that the president has much of a choice other than to do everything he can short of kinetic confrontation.
I completely agree, and I think you and I talked about this maybe 10 days ago. I've been surprised at the incrementalism of the sanctions. I understand the logic of it up to a point, but we're kind of past the point where you need to hold anything back. Putin is grabbing the dirty tricks bag and pulling everything out. We need to really slam the economic door and strangle his economy. And I think you got to go after oil and gas. I'll tell you one thing they've done that I really applaud is going after the central bank, the Russian central bank assets, which the Russian central bank foolishly allowed significant portion of their war chest, their $500 billion that they've been holding back for this moment. Foolishly on their part, they parked a lot of those assets in the West. I think they underestimated the degree to which the Europeans would come along in these sanctions. So they don't have the foreign reserves they had hoped for. They're seeing massive personal sanctions and broad economic sanctions. As you say, oil and gas is kind of the last card to play. I think that's coming.
I hope it's tonight. It would make the State of the Union special. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, and I don't project my impressions of leaders onto the media because I'm not in a position to judge Putin's state of mind. I just know what he's doing, and what he's doing is reverting to Chechnya and Syrian tactics. In terms of what you've seen, I can judge the state of the mind of the German public because all of a sudden, nearly 90% of them support massive hikes in defense spending. As a former NATO allied supreme commander, that's got to surprise you and encourage you.
It's been quite amazing to watch something I've been personally lobbying for and advocating for, along with the entire U.S. government, for 3 decades, and in my case, 4 years as Supreme Allied Commander, literally buttonholing Chancellor Merkel and then Minister of Defense Ursula von der Leyen, who's now the head of the European Union, personally buttonholing them and begging them to increase defense spending. And all of a sudden, in 48 hours, Vladimir Putin has shown he's a much better persuader than Admiral James Stavridis. So I'm highly encouraged by this. I think it's been a wake-up call for Europe. And by the way, watch Sweden and Finland. If you woke up in Stockholm and Helsinki and you're outside the NATO alliance, I think this is the week when you start demanding a NATO membership card out of your government. And boy, that's got to be part of Vladimir Putin's worst nightmare.
It should be. Now, I am surprised that the West has responded as quickly as it has. I'm gratified that it has. Now the question is the United States' response to all of this. Do you think we'll get an increase in defense spending tonight in the State of the Union?
I think we have to see that, and I think it will also be strongly supported on both sides of the aisle. And I hope that the Pentagon will seize the moment to move the dial on the choice of weapons system toward the new weapons of war, which are going to be cyber, unmanned systems, space, special forces, which are going to end up, I think, being highly useful in this situation. Those are systems we need. Do we still need significant, strong, if you will, conventional capabilities? Yes. And we also, by the way, need to keep our eye on China and other potential opponents. So the Pentagon, I know, has the plans in place to do that. It's going to need a little push from the president tonight, and then I think you're going to see both houses of Congress strongly support this.
Now, Admiral, I want to close by talking about the media. I listen very closely when Jack Keane is on and you're on. As high-ranking general and flag officers, I tend to lean in when those people talk. Less so when we've got colonels, very less so when we got people like me talking about other than domestic politics. What's the quality of the commentary been, in your view, on the military side of this?
Oh, I think it's been quite good, partly because the U.S. government has been so, shall we say, so generous with its intelligence. I can't remember a conflict where the Pentagon laid out more clearly exactly what's happening on the ground. And of course, they do that not to make life better for military analysts, but in order to shine a light on what the Russians are doing. It's like having a burglar approaching your house. You know, job one is turn on all the outside lights so you can see exactly where he is and what he's doing. So I think the job of military analysts has been easier, if you will, because of the extreme generosity of the intelligence. And then secondly, because all of us have seen these playbooks now 3-4 times. We've seen Putin use these tactics in Georgia. You mentioned Chechnya earlier, Syria above all. I think the real dark end of the spectrum here is Putin gets deeply frustrated and decides to go big, meaning we're just not going to worry about collateral damage anymore, like he does in Syria, and start dropping buildings and taking out villages because Zelensky's cell phone signal was there. Pretty soon you've got Aleppo on the Dnieper River. That's where we go.
I think that's the case. Now, I want to close with a giant theory that I want to test on you. Europe's reaction has been surprising and encouraging. I think it's because the assumption was, while there might be limited wars in the Balkans, while there might be a Georgia incursion, an incursion into Ukraine that results in a minor, no one thought that a full-scale ground war in Europe was ever going to come back. And the fact that it is occurring, and we don't know where he's going to stop, and he put his weapons on high alert, the nuclear force, that just tells us that the Europeans have been dreaming a dream. You can't walk away from history. Do you agree with that? That's the shock, is that little wars were expected, minor provocations, nothing in Europe, but this just throws that all out the window?
100%. And as I've been saying, what we're witnessing is like watching the History Channel from 1939, except it's happening right in front of us. And second point to be made, the 1939 events to 45, that happened within living memory. My mother is alive, vibrant. She remembers World War II. She remembers all of this vividly. In Europe, this rattles old and dangerous ghosts.
Good morning, Glory, America. State of the Union Day. I'm Hugh Hewitt. President Biden will be addressing a joint session of Congress tonight. Will be very thinly attended because of restrictions Speaker Pelosi has put into place. Masks will no longer be mandatory. I'm not sure if my first guest, Congresswoman Ashley Hinson from the 1st District of Iowa, will be there. Congresswoman, welcome back. Will you be in the audience tonight?
Well, certainly trying to, Hugh, but I received an indeterminate COVID test result, so we're trying to sort through that, and all of us had to go through the testing process to be able to be in the room. So we'll see. We just have to get that sorted out. And one thing's for sure, Hugh, I'm looking forward to holding the president accountable, hearing what he has to say tonight, and making sure that I'm continuing to, tell Iowan stories here in Washington.
Now, tonight, you know the governor of Iowa, and I'm a big Kim Reynolds fan. I'm not sure I would pick her given events to do the response tonight because it's a national security night. What do you expect from the governor if no change is made?
Well, I think it's a clear contrast, Hugh, and that's exactly why our governor from Iowa is delivering that response. It's just a void in leadership at the White House. You look at how Governor Reynolds has led in our state. Kids have been in the classroom for over the year. She helped our small businesses to reopen safely. We just signed some bipartisan tax cuts into law last year. So what a contrast between what we're doing in Iowa, how we're running our state, versus how things are being run here in Washington, D.C.
I get that, but I'm not sure that she's going to be the right person to demand oil and gas sanctions effectively. Where there's Cotton and your colleague. You're on appropriations. I am curious if you've heard rumblings about an increased defense appropriation, Congresswoman Hinson.
Yeah, we're having a conversation, I believe, on Thursday this week as members of the Appropriations Committee to try to figure out what we're doing there. We had obviously a classified briefing as members of Congress yesterday on the situation in Ukraine. It is dire what's happening there, and we need to make sure that we continue to stand with the Ukrainian people because President Putin in Russia is a bully. This is an unprecedented attack on a sovereign nation, and we need to make sure that we're providing them all the help that we can.
Now, in terms of that, Ken Calvert, your colleague from California, is the ranking Republican on the defense appropriations. Would we consider forward funding deterrent because our nuclear forces obviously have to be improved and modernized, especially the Columbia-class boomer submarines, and especially, I guess, ICBM silos are getting pretty old. Any conversation about that, Congresswoman?
Not yet. Again, I think it's a little premature. We haven't had a chance to get together as a conference, let alone as an appropriations committee to have that discussion. But I can tell you this, that we are very, very concerned with the rhetoric coming out of Russia. We're very, very concerned that civilian lives continue to be lost. I'm encouraged by the fact that we are seeing our allies in the region finally step up. I think, unfortunately, what we saw with the sanctions that came, it was too little too late. We were saying, hey, we should have put these into place months ago so that they actually would have been a deterrent. And now we're seeing the results of what happens when you don't have that strong deterrent up front. He's invaded. They're taking it from a multi-front standpoint, and there's possibilities that other countries and many of our allies could be threatened as well.
Now, Ashley Hinson, Congresswoman, last night we were talking on Special Report about what the American people are saying. It's worse this morning. We're seeing atrocities, right? The bombing of downtown Kharkiv with cluster bombs, indiscriminate killing of civilians and children. And 57% of Americans, according to Quinnipiac, don't think the president has done enough. Do you think he will do more tonight?
Well, I certainly hope, because there's been a void in leadership in this area. Again, we heard from Secretary Blinken, Secretary Mayorkas, the generals, our defense secretary yesterday. It's very clear that the administration is taking it seriously, what's happening in Russia. I don't want to, undermine that at all. But I think we do need leadership here to make sure that our allies, to make sure Ukraine knows that we are not going to let President Putin be successful in taking over this country.
Now, I want to close with a political question, Congresswoman. Have the new districts been drawn in Iowa?
Yes, they are. They're all set. We're out campaigning. We picked up 6 new counties, so lots of minivan time on the road.
Did you keep your home? Usually yes. When some people get thrown out of their own districts.
Yeah, no, I'm very lucky. I continue to live with my family in Marion, Iowa, and we're pretty much, I think, 90% of the people I currently represent are in my new congressional district. So
did Iowa pick up a seat?
Make sure we get out and nope, we did not pick up a seat. We maintained our 4 that we have, and I think we have a real chance this year to make sure we have all 4 seats be Republican seats.
Oh, way to go. Congresswoman Hinson, thank you for joining me. Good luck on the Appropriations Committee. Spend on defense. Not a penny for a tribute. Lots and lots. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be on with you.
To your great disappointment, I'm not going to ask you 5 questions about Donald Trump. I just don't understand interviews that go that way. I'm going to ask you about the State of the Union and what you want to hear tonight. I want to hear sanctions on Russian gas and oil. Do you expect we'll get that?
Hugh, I don't expect we'll get that, but we should get it. Hugh, to your broader point, Joe Biden has been caught on the back foot from the very beginning. We have ceded the initiative to Vladimir Putin for 4 or 5 months. During that time, I've been urging the president to take quicker action, more decisive action, and tougher action. Early sanctions, more deliveries of weapon systems, and to make it clear what would happen if Vladimir Putin went down this path. Now, unfortunately, he didn't do that. I think, along with his concessions to Putin over the last year, emboldened Vladimir Putin, as well as the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Right now, some of our European allies are actually moving faster than we are, which is good for them, although they should have been moving earlier too. But there's still more things we can do. One of the most important things we could do, as you say, Hugh, is announce oil and gas sanctions. So we're no longer sending hundreds of millions of dollars every day to Vladimir Putin's war machine. And make the SWIFT sanctions comprehensive to cut off every bank in Russia. You know, Democrats keep saying that, well, we've sanctioned 80% of the banks in Russia. Unfortunately, Vladimir Putin controls 100% of the banks in Russia. So 20% of the banks can be used to evade these sanctions over time. And then, of course, we need to continue to rush even more weapons to the front. So the brave Ukrainian people have done such a valiant job over the last week of defending themselves, can continue to do so.
Senator Cotton, we are, quote, leading from behind, close quote, again. This is the famous Barack Obama formulation that governed our Libya policy when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was in charge and Tony Blinken was the vice president, now President Biden's national security advisor. We're back to leading from behind. The Europeans are actually tougher than we are. Germany, of all people, is doing more than we are. They've already voted 100 million euros into a special fund. Will the appropriators get to work? Will armed services and intel get to work and get a supplemental done?
Hugh, unfortunately, I'm not actually seeing that kind of urgency, and it's not just from the also from the Biden administration. We've now had 2 separate cabinet-level conversations with the full Senate, and in both of those conversations, they've had a chance to ask for more money. They've been specifically asked by Republican senators, how much more money will you need in the supplemental bill? How much more money will you need in the annual defense bill? And in both of those instances, they refused to give an answer. It just goes to show, again, that the Biden administration is still not taking seriously the threats that we faced. Part of the reason we're in this situation is they thought that they could simply talk Vladimir Putin out of his long-standing ambition, as opposed to back it up with the credible threat of force, both economic force and weapons into the hands of Ukrainians.
Now, we've seen the effectiveness.
After the invasion, we still haven't seen that.
We've seen the effectiveness of the javelins, and I know that President Trump authorized them. It was a slow deployment of the javelins to Ukraine. Secretary Esper, when he was Army Secretary, was not very enthusiastic about this, but they got there. Now Germany is sending Stingers, which are ground-to-air missiles, which take out the Russian Air Force. Apparently, we're going to do that as well. But do you have any idea of how fast and how many we're sending?
Hewitt, I don't want to get into how much the United States are sending. We're also working with our partners to send them, and some of those partners naturally are getting them there very fast, given their proximity to Ukraine. But it's still not fast enough, and there's not enough. We should have been stockpiling these things in Ukraine for the last 6 months. You asked the Biden administration or my Democratic colleagues why we weren't doing that, and they blame Volodymyr Zelensky. They say that he didn't want them, he didn't ask for them. It's like, well, part of effective diplomacy is encouraging our allies to do the right thing if they even are speaking what is a factual matter. What these Ukrainians needed was to have these weapons ready and available in large scale So none of these columns you see moving down the street, none of the aircraft you see in the sky could do so with impunity. They have proven to be very courageous and valiant fighters and skilled fighters when they have the arms they need. But clearly, they're going to need more, and they should have had more already, and we should be getting them more.
I'm not sure you've seen the video from Kharkiv yet this morning of the devastated center of the city where cluster bombs and other munitions, allegedly a vacuum bomb as well, that's an allegation, not a proven thing, but the cluster bomb has been proven by Bellingcat. I am curious whether there isn't some level of international opprobrium that can still be brought to bear on every Russian. They fired the head of the Berlin Symphony today. He's a Putin pal. Is it time to send home the NHL, Russia's player? Is it time to really make Russia feel this?
Well, Hugh, to give you an example of why Vladimir Putin thought he could get away with this, you just saw the ridiculous spectacle at the Winter Olympics of something called the Russian Olympic Committee competing. Even though Russia's had a widespread systematic doping program for its Olympic team for years and years and years, and we made a show of kicking them out of the Olympics, and we turned around and let them compete. If you can't even enforce the rules in a game, why do you think Vladimir Putin would worry about you enforcing the rules when it comes to warfare?
True.
Just every Russian who bears any degree of culpability, especially the oligarchs who have gotten rich and powerful off of Vladimir Putin's regime, should be paying the price for this invasion. At the same time, Hugh, I think it's important to remember that the first victims of Vladimir Putin's aggression and brutality are the Russian people.
Now,
and I also credit those brave Russians in places like St. Petersburg and Moscow who are protesting by the thousands. Hugh, this is not like America, where you can go out and protest whatever your politics are. Protesting Vladimir Putin can bring a death sentence to you. So we should, and look at what some of these conscripts in the Russian army are doing in Ukraine as well, Hugh. They didn't even know that they were in Ukraine. They thought they were doing training exercises in Belarus. This is not a war of Russia on Ukraine. This is Vladimir Putin's war against Ukraine.
your longtime friend Secretary Pompeo was on yesterday denouncing the fact that we're back in negotiations with the Iranians through Russian proxies. There were Russians at the table speaking on our behalf in Vienna yesterday. Does anyone in the Senate on the other side raise a voice about this? We've got to cut them out of everything, and we can't do a deal with the Iranians. Talk about projecting weakness. That would be the ultimate in projecting weakness.
It's just another example of why Putin probably thinks he can get away with this in the long run. If we're cutting them off from European airspace and taking their soccer clubs and seizing their yachts and sanctioning some of their banks, yet we'll sit down with them at the negotiating table at Vienna to try to get a terrible nuclear deal with Iran, he knows that Joe Biden is not serious about fighting this fight for the long run. Just like we've isolated Vladimir Putin in so many other ways, we should not be negotiating a dangerous nuclear deal with his aid with Iran.
There was a shouted question at the president yesterday, are you afraid of nuclear war? He said no. What did you make of Putin's upping of his nuclear forces alert level?
Nuclear saber-rattling, Hugh, is a long-standing tool of Russian statecraft, whether it's Soviet Russia or Vladimir Putin. And when Russia engages in nuclear saber-rattling, what they are doing is trying to frighten Western leaders, to include America, into diminished resolve and unwillingness to confront their aggression. There's no need for us at the moment that I'm aware of to go to any other more heightened nuclear posture. After all, our nuclear missiles are always ready to fire on just a moment's notice, and our submarines are always on patrol. But it's also not a time for diminished resolve in the face of nuclear saber-rattling, because resolution where others waver is a hallmark of leadership among nations and men.
Are you going to be attending the State of the Union tonight, Senator?
Well, Hugh, they've been mandating some COVID theatrics, social distancing and masking and testing. I think that they're thinking about removing those. I won't engage in those theatrics, but if they remove those, then I may be there. We'll see.
I would like people to sit on their hands when he says things short of sanctioning gas and oil, because that's the last thing we can do.
I don't know. You may have seen the news at the White House today. They're no longer requiring masks. They said the data has changed. I agree, the data has changed. The polling data shows that Joe Biden and his COVID policies are massively unpopular, and they know that it's going to cause them to get beaten badly this November. So that's the data that's changed at the White House, and that data may have changed in Nancy Pelosi's house as well.
You know, the polling data also showed from Quinnipiac that 57%, that's a big number, as you know, 57% don't think President Biden has been strong enough on Ukraine. Does that penetrate the Klein defenses at the White House? Does someone get inside the blue bubble and say to the president, sanction Russian oil and gas?
No, unfortunately, Hugh. I mean, what we saw at that briefing to senators last night was people that are trapped in that bubble patting themselves on the back about the robust, unprecedented diplomatic coalition they built, which, Hugh, to me, sounds kind of like Neville Chamberlain celebrating the coalition he built to declare war on Germany after it invaded Poland in September 1939. The whole point of building a diplomatic coalition is you do so in advance, backed by strength, to avoid war in the first place.
Were they really giving themselves high fives?
Yes, Hugh, absolutely. It's the same rhetoric you've seen on television from the president's spokesman and his cabinet members, celebrating what a great diplomatic response it's been since Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, not acknowledging that the invasion of Ukraine is the failure of policy to begin with.
Will you be doing any media after the speech tonight, Senator?
I don't know, Hugh.
Well, I hope you are one of the people that mark whether or not he does the one thing he needs to do, which is sanction oil and gas sales and those who receive them. Last question, would you agree it's not just sanctions on Russian oil and gas, but people who transship them and buy them should be sanctioned?
Yeah, Hugh, there's a lot of things that we can do, stuff that goes into kind of the international plumbing of markets, whether it's ships, which transport about 2/3 of Russian oil, the insurance companies that insure those shipments, and similar kinds of targets along the entire supply chain of Russian oil until it gets to the point of the end use.
I will look for those. Senator Cotton, always a pleasure. Thank you. Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas. We'll check in with him again next week. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Breaking news. The EU is sending 16 Bulgarian MiG-29s, 28 MiG-29s from Poland, and 12 MiG-29s from Slovakia to Ukraine. And Bulgaria is sending 14 Su-25s. Those are the ground support planes that can chew up columns. More on that as it occurs. I'm joined now by Kenny Shue. I told you I have a brand new sponsor of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Color Us United, which is rejecting what American Express has done in their unamericanexpress.com campaign. Kenny, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Glad to have you as a sponsor. Tell us about Color Us United.
We advocate for a race-blind America. That's what Color Us United does, colorusunited.org. That means that we conduct institutional guerrilla warfare against institutions that have gone woke. That means CRT in schools. They're creating the demand side. They're creating the demand for wokeness among children, but also corporations like American Express, who by their un-American policies are creating a supply of wokeness through things like ESG, their DEI trainings, their hirings based on race and equity. That's what we are campaigning against. We're sending a message at unamericanexpress.com, and you should join in. Make your voice known. We don't want wokeness or politicization of our corporations.
ESG stands for Environmental, Social, Governmental Policies, and this became all the rage about 5 years ago, but they ignored things like genocide in Syria and Russian aggression against Ukraine. Meanwhile, they worry about America's sins of the last 400 years. So, Kenny, what does someone do when they go to unamericanexpress.com? Unamericanexpress.com is where the first campaign of Color Us United is underway.
Exactly. And you know what is so ironic about ESG? They will never hold China to the same standards that they're holding America and the West with environmental and social governance. They say, oh, we need diversity in our board membership in America, 15% Black Americans. They'll never say that. But with ESG and everything that's going on, what you can do when you go to unamericanexpress.com is we have a petition for you that you want to sign, make your voice known, say we need to stop Amex's woke policies. It'll go directly to Amex CEO Steve Squeri, and hopefully it'll be put up for a vote at the end of May in Amex's annual board meeting. You
know, this battle was fought in the 90s in places like California, where a a race-neutral mandate was imposed upon state action. Right now with this Supreme Court, if the government were to do what American Express is doing in its hiring, that would be unconstitutional. Do you expect to make a difference, Kenny, or is this about stopping the next corporation from doing what American Express has already done?
I think we can make a huge difference if we organize the voices of millions of angry Americans. We know wokeness is unpopular. We saw the election of Glenn Youngkin in Virginia based on CRT in schools. We know the backlash against BlackRock that's been happening because of their ties to China. Now we know that American Express, by adopting these race-based policies, is doing something completely un-American. That's the Un-American Express, unamericanexpress.com. And the only way we're going to be able to stop wokeness is if we organize the voices of millions. And that's what Color Us United is set up to do.
When did Amex adopt their diversity and equity guidelines?
In the wake of George Floyd. Actually, they've always had it, but they were much more aggressive about it after George Floyd. And what I've heard from employee testimony is that it's damaged the culture at Amex significantly. They used to be such a great employer for all races. Now they're inspiring racial resentment because now you can't even criticize a person of a certain race, or if you try to fire a person of a certain race, they're going to come after you as well. They're totally bent on hiring based on race, on making sure that they meet certain racial quotas to look good. It's not about meritocracy anymore. It's not about promoting based on who's the most qualified or who makes the company most profitable. It's about promoting based on this devious idea of race and social class.
Kenny, I'm pretty sure that a bunch of the Russian oligarchs have got the highest level card, not platinum, but whatever the ebony card is, the big card. Have we seen American Express say anything about Putin's war crimes?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They are, and speaking about that Amex Black Card, the reason why we believe our campaign with the voice of millions against Un-American Express will be successful is because they're so reliant upon their brand, right? Un-American Express gets more value per customer than Visa or MasterCard, about 4 times as much, because they're so reliant upon that prestige of that brand. But if we can show that what they're doing is actually un-American, then we can show with the voices of millions that this is not something that people will stand for.
Head over to unamericanexpress.com or just go direct to colorusunited.org. Colorusunited.org, 3 words altogether, colorusunited.org, or head to unamericanexpress.com. Kenny, thank you. Continued good luck with your campaign. Great to have you on board as a sponsor. I have long been a proponent of color blindness in the United States. The only way the country works is colorblind. The only way. A country this diverse can only work if every citizen is a citizen in full and none is less than a citizen in full. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Adam and Ben. Thank you, Generalissimo. The latest on State of the Union tomorrow. I'll be on special report tonight before the State of the Union gets going to tell you what I expect, which is not much, but maybe there'll be some leaks that will turn it around in the course of the day. Pray for Ukraine. See you tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.